Since its inception, the so-called forefathers of this country have interpreted the differences in skin tone and culture as a warrant to exploit and dehumanize the people who exhibit those traits. Since its inception, the murder of people of color has seen no consequence in this country. So it should come as no surprise to see these very high-profile cases end in acquittals or the absence of convictions. Nonetheless, these cases have sparked national outrage and ignited the streets with the fury of all nationalities, declaring that Black Lives Matter. To better understand this anger, we must closely consider the larger picture, a picture painted by the legacy of slavery and habitual oppression that confronts Black people. The Black community has the second highest poverty rate, and nearly half of all Black children in America live in poverty. America is notorious for its abominable participation in slave labor, and today our prisoners make up 25% of the global prison population, while we make up a mere 5% of the world population. 2.3 million people are incarcerated in America, and roughly 1 million of them are Black, which I would like to point out is more Black people that were enslaved in 1850. A Black woman who applies for food stamps with her 2 children will receive less aid than a white woman applying for food stamps with her 2 children. We're in prison not because our presence on the other side of those bars that wound families and suffocate futures, is a threat to safety and peace, but in the name of lining the pockets of CEOs and as a means to cripple any chance at advancing as a people. Racism is alive and well, and white supremacy has existed far prior to the birth of America, and you would be a fool to believe that it does not exist today and that it is not deteriorating communities of color everywhere. The white supremacist American society has been bred to associate melanin with crime, danger, poverty, ignorance, and lack of civility. All of these traits, who nobody acts will have attributed to them, make it easier for social groups, white people in particular, to digest the systemic oppression that plagues our communities. In addition to the unsolicited and biased police attention, Black people are suffocating in an environment where the media showcases our natural features as ugly and undesirable. In the history we're taught, conveniently excludes contributions from people who look like us. In this system, the system takes so many avenues to hold down people of color, particularly Black people, and the horrific and unjustifiable murders of Mike Brown, Eric Garner, and Freddie Gray were the last straw. It took the loss of so many lives to finally regain the confidence to rise up. And as a result, we have a national community banding together, despite the differences, to declare that the state will no longer continue to pluck us off one by one without a fight. I find it very interesting that the politicians and even our own president would label these demonstrators as thugs and their rage is unjustified, but not once has condemned the vile mistreatment that preceded. Baltimore has been patronized for reacting with violence, but I believe that the occupation in the Middle East is violent, and the $2 billion that the U.S. annually aids the Palestinian genocide is violence, and that the sanctions on sovereign nations resisting capitalism and imperialism is violence. Through the lens of the mass media, the protesters in Baltimore are criminals, while the manic murderers who stole the life of their brother are simply public servants who are just doing their duty. But I think that a lot of us believe that it is our duty to fight. Our sisters and brothers are being hunted, and we're not supposed to be emotional. Police violence and capitalism are a package deal. One is inextricably attached to the other. It's rather important to understand that the police serve a very particular purpose in the capitalist context. Contrary to popular belief, the phrase "to protect and serve" glued to the side of their vehicles is purely ornamental. Here in LA, the police have killed hundreds of unarmed people since 2001 and not a single conviction. Is that safety? Every 28 hours, a Black man is killed by law enforcement. Is that protection? The police are the strong arm of the ruling class and the buffer between the super rich who exploit the masses of people and the masses of people who are exploited between the super rich. People who live in communities occupied by the police, where state-sanctioned violence can take your life upon bruising the delicate white chauvinist ego of a police officer, know very well that the police do not operate in their interest. The driving force behind this movement, that many are referring to as this new civil rights movement, is that people are fed up with the accumulating injustices that confront them. And I think that the DOJ report on Ferguson further proves that the community was not only responding to the unjust murder of Mike Brown, but also that they were just responding to the overall abysmal conditions of Black people in America. The burning buildings in Baltimore and in Baltimore's Sandtown that flooded the news screens, as opposed to the peaceful demonstrations, took place in a town that exhibited 50% unemployment. It is a struggle to be a person of color in general in America. And when we constantly hear our brothers and sisters being murdered in the streets and the people responsible walk away from it all without consequence, of course we're going to make some noise. And what did the ruling class expect? Killer cops belong in jail. The widespread anger consolidated by the ceaseless murder of unarmed black men has brought the need to organize and win dignity that we deserve as human beings and the safety our children deserve to the forefront of black consciousness. Such resistance has grown into a widespread movement for justice, equality, and self-determination. I think that that's what's really impressive about this uprising, that it's an issue that all people of color recognize. Mike Brown was killed countless times before August. Ferguson PD is every police department that profiles, perverts, and murders unarmed black and brown people, which I guess I could say is every police department. Obviously, this movement is geared toward the liberation of the historically oppressed black masses, but there is such an undeniable strong sense of solidarity within this movement that makes it all the more powerful. Repression is the recognition of a movement qualified to dismantle a racist system. There were innumerable instances where peaceful protests were met with rubber bullets, mass arbitrary arrests, tear gas, and heavily armed riot officers. And they would be wise to recognize the threat of an organized people's movement such as this one. Many of us may be familiar with the case of Miley Hampton. She is a black organizer in Sacramento who was recently charged with lynching for her participation in a counter-protest against the police. Lynching is the term that our courts use to describe someone attempting to free a detainee from police custody. But why that word? I mean, what lynching is really used to refer to is the act of racist mobs hanging black people from nooses on tree branches, and the audacity to try to erase such a violent, barbaric history of an act of terrorism that stole countless lives and replace it with a circumstantial crime punishable up to 4 years in prison is egregious. The fact that a black woman was charged with lynching while fighting the struggle against racism further exposes the lack of respect for the struggle and history that our people have overcome. Organizers in SAC and other answer branches stood up for Miley and packed the courts during her trial, and her charges were subsequently dropped. For decades on top of decades on top of decades, black and brown women and men have been carelessly murdered. And this isn't news to anyone, not just because I've stated it before in this talk, but I'm sure that's why we're all here. But some people, and perhaps I should say many people, are only outraged when they hear of a few broken windows or looted consumer products, without understanding that these material objects belong to corporations that will use the wealth they stole from our labor to replace them if they are not already insured. But the life of Freddie Gray can never be replaced or replicated, and neither can the lives of Mike Brown, Eric Garner, A.N.S.W.E.R, and many others. But you know what can be replaced? This racist system, built on imperialist wars, the theft of indigenous lives, land, slave labor, and perpetual oppression of the people who have everything to gain from its downfall. The movement is growing, and there is now more than ever a greater dialogue about long-term organizing. And there are significant reforms on the horizon in LA, and though it's very early, too early to tell how effective they may be, it's important not to become too satisfied once they are implemented. Because though reforms may alleviate some of the burden, they are just reforms, and they stand no chance at ending police terror, and in many ways inspire complacency in the movement. The issue of police terror, police violence, can never be abolished with legislation. It can never be solved, and it can't even be solved by the way we act, because the truth is America will criminalize the arbitrary behavior of black people and people of color. No matter how we see ourselves or how much we respect ourselves, they will always see us as two-thirds a person and treat us as such. It is not us that needs to change, but it is them. We must understand that the sole purpose of police power is to infringe upon the rights of working people like us by means of harassment, brutalization, and dehumanization. That under capitalism, antagonism between the police and our communities will always exist because the police work in the interest of the ruling class, and the people in the community work to advance the needs of everyone else. As long as we approach this issue on a case-by-case basis, we will continue to endure the struggle against police and the vicious cycle of justification for the use of police militarization and murder. Police militarization and mass incarceration do not stop crime. It destroys families and futures and the solace that should exist in the immediate community surrounding your home. Meeting the people's needs stop crime. Give us a job with a livable wage that we can actually survive on so that we don't have to resort to methods that the system deems illegal. It should be illegal to allow people to sleep on the street when there are vacant homes and hotels. It should be illegal to inflate the prices of medicine and adequate healthcare that people need, but it isn't. I said earlier that police violence and capitalism is a package deal. And what I meant by that is, as long as we live under a system where the workers are exploited by and oppressed by a tiny group of rich people, there will exist state forces to ensure that the masses of people don't unite and rise up against them. And though this is accomplished through various other calculated class divisions, that primary responsibility belongs to and will continue to belong to the police. Who comes to throw you out when your landlord evicts you? Who storms the peaceful protest with tear gas and zip ties to tell the masses to knock it off? Who makes sure the homeless people don't occupy these vacant properties? It is not in the interest of the people that the police do any of this, but it's in the interest of the capitalist system in preserving it. Fighting racism means fighting the system that uses it to sustain itself. We must combat this system with the same intensity of organization and strategy that our oppressors use against us. And the best way to do this is to be a part of an organization dedicated to the struggle and works to dismantle capitalism from all angles. The A.N.S.W.E.R Coalition acknowledges the connection between the struggle against racism and the foundation of this unjust system. And we have organized a campaign demanding amnesty for Baltimore. We want to convict all 6 cops and drop all the charges against anyone arrested during the Baltimore uprising. So I encourage everyone to join the A.N.S.W.E.R Coalition to build a movement that will rise with the fall of every drop of a police casing from their guns and defeat racism. Thank you.